Chapter 16. Hoodwinked Offerings and IT in Siberia. The Jesuits are a secret society, a sort of Masonic order, with superadded features of revolting odiousness and 1,000 times more dangerous. Samuel Morse. He lived from 1791 to 1872. It's winter. The Pope is not in Castle Gandolfo in winter, but you know, today's Pope, what is it, Francis, the guy from South America? He never spends time here, Mitch. It's not a good look, I guess, well, with him being so Fabian. This place is just too much, a veritable tourist destination, but in winter, well, you get fine rates. Old Frankie put me in this suite for free. Of course, Mr. Gates. No, it's just us. We have to speak plainly. Call me Steve. You see me in a suit? Looks more like a sweatshirt. And it's pink, because that's benign. That's reliable, relatable, casual, comfortable. So now you too, Mitch, be casual, be comfortable. We're all alone, but I've got to ask, I've just got to ask. I've got to ask why, Mitch? Why do you hate me so much? Of course I don't hate you, Steve. Mitch Schumer was beginning to sweat, but refused to show it. He had shifty eyes and the chin of a turtle. He was portly and less than attractive. Mitch was in his mid-60s and a thoroughly useless man. Not in the sense that he had no use. All men, all women, all people who've ever lived, all have a use in the world. All have a purpose and a destiny. But those who decide they will use their position selfishly become useless. Their destiny is accomplished collaterally, and they do not realize it. If they had faced the evil with an intention to overcome it, they would have been victorious. They would have become heroic, but they ran away. Since they fled instead, the goal of evil may have been thwarted, but this happened with no accompanying reward. God's will is accomplished despite those he uses to accomplish it. If they do as they should, they enter into glory. If they don't, God continues, but they lose out. It is only themselves they harm. So many power-hungry leaders are this way. So many career politicians represent the embedded, corrupt bedrock of so many establishments in so many countries. This was the station of U.S. politician Mitch Schumer. Global corporate tool Steve Gates understood as much, but also understood that self-interested, weak, dependent, useless men were counterintuitively valuable. He was valuable, after all. When corruption and free handouts bring a person to a position of prominence, they fear so deeply losing that position that they become quite motivated. This is especially true when they see peers who fail become ejected from life or metaphorically crucified by the media. Yet Mitch Schumer, he'd outworn his usefulness even so, and by several decimal places. Steve Gates blinked at Mitch, adjusted the crotch of his sweatpants, cleaned his glasses on his pink sweatshirt, and exhaled, "If you don't hate me, why do you make things so hard for me, Mitch?" "I had a good reason to pull her out of that GCT campus and send her to the Black Hills." The technology Pope exhaled, looked at his soft pink hands, then cast his nearsighted eyes toward the marble-domed ceiling. Everything was so ornate in Castel Gandolfo. Frescoes were everywhere. Filigreed columns broke up balconies surrounding varying rooms. Arches with meticulous gold leaf revealed riches upon riches. Color, design, vibrancy. An apex of Italian engineering layered in the history of Rome itself. Romulus and Remus were said to have come from that very city. Certainly its modern royal palace would combine such historical elegance into a singularity of luxe. The floors were polished to a shine and looked like the world's most expensive marble. In many cases, their construction was even more ornate and valuable than that. Varying precious stones made up aspects of floors under translucent polish. The papal palace specifically had been built in the early 1600s and maintained religiously into the present day. No pun intended, or perhaps pun intended. The entire compound, at around 5.5 square miles, was huge. There was much more to explore, much to appreciate, and much to recommend its golden Renaissance beauty. Even the city surrounding the papal summer residence was priceless. How much more so the hallowed grounds of the pontiff's summer home. Mitch, Castel Gandolfo, she has a more space than the Vatican. She's a bigger womb, and she has, what is that word? Extraterritoriality, Mitch offered. Precisely. We're in Italy, but we're not in Italy. I want to show you something. Close the shutters to the sea there, would you? It's a fine suite, but it's not a smart suite. Mitch obliged, walking across the room and closing several shutters that had a magnificent view of the Tyrrhenian waves of the Mediterranean 10 miles to the west. The day was cold, but it was quite clear. Very good. Thank you, Mitch. Can you get the other ones also? Certainly. Mitch walked all the way across the large and ornate bedroom to the shutters with a view on Lake Albano on the opposite side. Very good. Now, Gates carefully lifted his frumpy body from the soft chair he was reclining in, shuffling his way out from behind the Bacote wood desk. Just follow me, Mitch. And he went to a bookshelf, and where he pulled back a version of the Apocrypha in Italian, a catch was released, and Gates carefully opened the hidden door that was in reality the entire shelf. He hardly had to expend any effort, so meticulously maintained were the hidden hinges. Truly a feat of engineering. They were designed for powerful, rich men like Gates who had the force of money, but not the force of muscle. Behind the bookcase was a steep, curving stair. Come on, he said, and began his ascent. Mitch Schumer was beginning to sweat, but followed willingly. The door closed silently behind them, ushering in almost total darkness. This part of Castle Gandolfo was in no way ornate. It was crude, old, cold, and lightless, some hidden passage between rooms built in the 1600s, known to the Pontiff or whoever he decided to share his secret with, like Tech Pope Steve Gates, who was saying, "That girl, Zoe." Chloe, I think it is. Well, that was the code name. Her real name is Claire Freund, daughter to expat Germans who decided they preferred globetrotting to being parents and left her at a Jesuitical convent where she was scouted by Jeff. May he rest in peace, in 2011. So I'm told. It's all in Hake's dossier. Right, Claire. Yes, she had a few more years before her own baby maker got ripe. That mid-20s sweet spot, she still had some breaking in ahead of her. But now, well, where are all those years, Mitch? Steve turned and looked at him significantly in the darkness. She wasn't supposed to... Look, it was surveillance. She was the best asset in the region, so I'm told. We lose a smirker. Fine, he's old. He has more than fulfilled associated investment. I get it. Fine. Your man, the Bright Eyes, Farley. Well, that's a bigger loss, isn't it? But not by much. He's basically an attack dog. But the girl, Mitch! The girl! That womb was a posterity portal, you dig? This is why, Mitch, this is why we don't use women in operations. He slapped his hands in the dark to emphasize. They've got one purpose, and it's not some covert op. It was a honeypot operation. Of course. Still, under the pact, you know, she's outside our influence now. She's fair game to our allies. They'll use that posterity portal between her legs, and they will definitely use it. And where does that leave us, Mitch? Here, Steve pulled a torch from a sconce on the wall. Got any fire? I do. Mitch produced a lighter and held it out. The torch took the flame greedily. Thank you, said Gates. Mitch thought they were coming to the bottom of the stair, but it was only a landing. Steve waddled rather slow, but even so, they had already come at least to the first floor of the palace. Mitch wondered how deep the stairs went into the hillside. Castel Gandolfo was built at relatively high elevation compared to the Mediterranean in the west. It was about 1,300 feet above sea level, and the town surrounding the palace had 8,900 residents. How deep the stair went into this hill was anyone's guess. Mitch incidentally voiced this observation. And we sure are deep now. Only a quarter of the way, I'm afraid. It's a long way, but an elevator, engineers, laymen, builders, transportation, too much visibility. We're saving mankind, Mitch. It's the Great Commission. For some reason, Steve snickered, which was unsettling. Mitch didn't know what to say, so he defaulted to what worked. Yes. Gates stopped, looking up at the politician. But of course there's more than that. If we don't succeed, the Pleiadians will take over, Mitch. They will own this world. They will run it, or we will run it. It's up to us, Mitch. We must unite the world to stand against that. Well, there's no better word than invasion. It will be theirs, Mitch. All the Pleiadians. Or it will be ours. Mankind's. The true Stewards, the stewards of the world and the universe around it, and our Orionian allies will help us take our place in the seat of the universe, and we will help them in our own unique way. Sir, we still managed to plant the quantum data we intended on GCT's intranet cloud. I know I pulled Miss Freund before she was finished on that particular op, but we used a diversionary technique. 4 assets hit the campus the same night. They got that quantum data in GCT servers, and our intel indicates the bait has been taken. They're expanding qubit processing capabilities with what the Orionians gave us. They'll beat out our boys at CERN. We'll have the whole world going to and fro soon enough. Oh, I know, Mitch, but it has been months. And where is she now? Where is she? By our estimates, she passed through the veil, and now is a womb for the packed Orionians. Untouchable. All those years gone, Mitch. And not just her, but a smirker and that bright eyes handler, Farley. Yes, him. Gone. Decades. Millions. Devil only knows how far this sets us back, but that isn't enough. No, you didn't even find the crack in the world. From my intel, the fissure was found. It's just that we need a way of processing higher quantum data sets in real time to identify proper, how did he put it? I'm not a scientist. Proper electromagnetic energy entries, the 3 E's. You didn't even find the crack, Beta Steve re-emphasized. Oh, we'll get a new Claire Freund. We'll get a new, what's his name? Buford? The Bright Eyes, Farley. Right, we'll get a new Farley. Why do I keep forgetting his name? I remembered it before. It doesn't matter. We both know why. Plenty of kids are initiated by Jesuits as altar boys. Plenty of girls in orphanages all over the world. Them little daisies keep pushing up. You like the band Ween? Just the right trauma? Voila. Yeah, it takes years, but we have an assembly line now, don't we? You still flush the Pleiadian spy, and you lost the crack in the universe. And what? Now the cycle's got to start over? The whole damn domino tapestry comes tumbling down, and we've got to set up each block again for an entire generation? Mitch tried to play it off with a chuckle. You know, we have so many assets. It's not just AIC, sir. We have guys in every agency. AIC is just the flagship. This isn't even the end of the world. I absolutely know all that. Well, just hear me out, Steve. Plenty of CIA guys got the job done. They've had trauma techniques mastered since the 60s. They can produce zombies almost as pliable and reliable as a smirker. And the house with the reality fissure. We can purchase that house under a mining arrangement from one of the local companies in the area. We can set up a lab around the spot. The whole 9 yards. Don't you already own some land around there for some nuclear project you're working on? Great! Now I've got to make more moves and more suspicions. Just what my image needs. Greater suspicion. Like I said, why do you hate me, Mitch? Let's just scrum it a second. Just from the top. Say you make a lab out of that house. Will that stop the FBI agent, what's his name, Ed Fogarty, and that, who's the curry slurper of his? Curry slurper? Oh, it's what the cool kids in England call Indians. Who's that kid, Ed? The first time I've heard somebody say that. Richard Patel, I believe. But you know, okay, I can't imagine a lab in the hills would stop them. Then again, what do they really have? Skeeter gave them the business. They never spoke to Rufus. It's like somebody waved their hand real quick at the first domino and a wave of air hit, but it hasn't toppled yet. Why is it then that I hear they've booked passage to Eastern Russia? What's even in Russia? It's a shot in the dark, Mitch replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. It is it? Mused Tech Pope Steve Gates. They had reached the bottom of the stair. Now they were headed down a long, pitch-black corridor that smelled of wet stone and was downright claustrophobic. They could not walk abreast. Mitch had to follow along behind. Gates continued, and will you explain that to the rulers of millions, of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens? What are you quoting the Bible? I'll tell them anything you need. I just told you. I know you will. Mitch did not like the import of the short statement. He began to make his own case. Steve, we've always been at a disadvantage. Our agents don't even know they're involved with NanoFluff or Orange or Digiverse or Nile or MeTV or Countdown or Chirper or ABC Search. They don't know it's all one collective. They don't know about where we intersect with the Vatican. They have no idea. Your aunt was on the board for pregnancy planning. Nobody thinks you're involved with any pro-life Catholics. It's one thing for normie NPCs not to know. That's the status quo. But we got it all wrapped so tight. Most our compartmentalized NGOs and other contractors don't know either because they can't know. They wouldn't understand. They think it's some occult scientific thing like generic Scientology or a different order entirely. We get only the most ardent agnostics or atheists or outright Satanists because they're the only ones the Orionians work with. Or can, I suppose. Even expletives undo our plans to save the world, Steve. Some flunky hit his head and said, Jesus Christ. It reset a smirker. He started having an existential crisis. You know, it's been understood throughout history, in all times, in all eras, that someday the Pleiadians would come under the name of Jesus. One's going to go global with some Christ cosplay even. But it's all going to be tech, Mitch. And it has to be. We've got to keep their mind energy aligned. The world is a neural net, and we're going to feed it the data we want. And when we do that, Mitch, we're going to save humanity. We're going to save the world. We make the tough calls. Who else can determine that there's some human pruning that desperately needs to get done? I'm where I am for a reason. And Pope Francis understands. I am the second coming, Mitch. Our tech, it's a miracle. Just put on a headset and everybody can walk on water. There comes a time, Mitch. The Deca-Sovereign will lead the 300 who will lead the world, and our man will lead the Deca-Sovereign. And we have our man in the wings. Any day now, we knock those dominoes over. We execute the final command of our order. Maybe CERN will give us the go when we've pierced the veil. But maybe not. Especially if the Pleiadians already have a foot in the door. But we have our man. And I'm going to run him like an avatar. You understand, Mitch? Well, what do you want me to do about it? As I said, tell the order what you've told me. With that, the tech pope was quiet, and they continued their trek into the bowels of Castel Gandolfo. The path would turn, and there would be further stairs, and Mitch got the distinct impression they were coming around something big. It felt like the corridor silhouetting a football stadium, albeit smaller. Soon Mitch's impression was proven correct. They entered through a final door, this one twice the width of the corridor leading up to it, but small enough to seem lost in the cavernous room it led to, where dancing shadows made random pirouettes as light was lost in darkness under a roof of unknown height. Several hundred men stood holding torches that minimally illuminated the black hoods they wore in that subterranean chamber. There was a stone table in their center. Steve Gates indicated it to Mitch, saying, It's a sort of black mass, really. Have a seat on the table where you'll explain everything you just told me. Mitch felt his heart begin to beat harder. He had never been to one of these before. He intended to play ball, but sitting on a stone table in the center of a cavern under the papal summer home, surrounded by hooded men with torches, that had him just a tad uneasy. His politicking instincts kicked in, and he attempted to barter. I'm pretty loud. I can let them know from here. Shit! There was a terror now, and it felt almost as though Mitch were being dragged to the table by that fear. He found himself sitting on the edge of the table, and then two hoodless, terribly pale, bald men broke away from the hundreds. Rufus and Skeeter were these two. Smirkers, and living up to the name with their cobalt eyes and ever-present grins. They helped Mitch onto the table, and they also began to remove his shoes for him. He made a protest, but Gates said, Let them do their work, Mitch! Mitch acquiesced. The others continued to be silent in the chamber, motionless, only holding their massive torches. Steve Gates struggled to remove his pink sweatshirt, revealing withered, fat old skin. It was rather like looking at grass that has been under a stone through the summer. He was sickly pale and covered in sores. Gates walked to the stone table and stood behind Mitch, putting his hands on the politician's bony shoulders. Brethren, Mitch Schumer of the U.S. government is here to repay his debt to our order "And so he shall," echoed the hundreds in circumference. There was a loud booming sound. Mitch realized each person of the hundreds were carrying staves. The top of the staves were the torches. When they brought the staves down, not only did the simultaneous impact of hundreds of them echo ominously, it caused the flames to flicker collectively, which was extremely disorienting. Mitch began to explain. "We got the information to GCT. We got it to them. There's just an issue of a few missing bright eyes." "Smirkers!" Gates bellowed. A chant in Latin had broken out among those in circumference of the wide space. Skeeter and Rufus came up to where Mitch was on the table, and he immediately began to protest. Wait, listen. I'm going to be missed. I am an insanely visible loose end. There really wasn't much hope here, you know. Skeeter produced a dagger and immediately used it on the unprotected torso of Mitch Schumer as Tech Pope Steve Gates held his shoulders down and Rufus held his legs. Mitch was too shocked to make a noise for several seconds, but soon began to shriek. The Tech Pope took blood from the bleeding, struggling old man and smeared it on his own chest. The chanting reached a fever pitch. Mitch wept and struggled louder and more desperately, but the smirkers held him down until he bled out and it was all done and he was still. Skeeter giggled like a delighted child. "Thank you, my son," Steve Gates said, drawing an upside-down cross in blood on the dead head of Mitch Schumer. Men in Russian uniforms came and wheeled out the carcass. Gates reached for his black-rimmed trendy glasses, removing them, wiping blood on pinkish sweatpants, then putting them back on and addressing the gathered body of men in hooded cloaks. "Leaders of the world," he began, "Fabians, God-kings, brethren, our august, selfless ally, Mitch Schumer, one of the finest on our board of directors for Intelligence Bureau ACHE, of the United States. Well, it saddens me to say this, but he has been just viciously murdered by Russian terrorists. Likely the same who've been rigging elections in the United States the last couple of years. What are you gonna do?" A muted chuckle from the Hoodwinked reverberated through the chamber. Steve continued, It's just a terrible affront, and, well, it must be dealt with accordingly. Smirkers!" Here he turned to Skeeter and Rufus. "You returned to find your brother and your handler gone, just gone. And you conducted yourselves well. You kept the site clean. You followed the steps that you were told to follow, so now here's your reward. You are to find our Pleiadian enemies embedded in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They are Edward Fogarty and Richard Patel. Skeeter, you know what they look like. Follow them carefully. Do not be seen. When they reach their destination, then stop them. If you can black their eyes with the Orionians, fine. But if you can't, make sure they don't make it back. In all likelihood, they're going to find another fissure. We don't want to flush them away from it like Farley did before. But we don't want them not to find it. We need that intel. So, you find them, you stop them, you bring what you learn, what you see, back to us. Okay?" Steve Gates produced his trademark geeky smile. Of course, sir." Rufus and Skeeter were in perfect unison. They bowed to the Tech Pope and left the chamber. Gotta get a sip here. It took Clever Ed a solid 4 months to secure an opportunity for himself and Ricky overseas at the American Embassy in Yakutsk. It took until January for them to arrange the trip and make the journey, which means they got there as the cold season was picking up serious momentum in early 2022. Yakutsk is the most populated city in the Arctic. At the time Ed and Ricky came, it had just over 330,000 people, which made it around 90% the size of Cleveland. The big difference was Yakutsk was growing, whereas Cleveland was not. When their plane touched down at the regional airport at 3 in the afternoon on the 25th of January, 2022, it was also about 22 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. The locals laughed at the profound expressions of surprise defining Clever Ed and Ricky. It was technically a warm day. Ricky didn't believe it and immediately went to confirm on his phone. He was shocked. "It is no lie, sir," he said to Ed. "The average high is negative 32 at this time of year." Well, ain't that special? Clever Ed shivered out. They were in the back of a cab headed for the U.S. Embassy. The heat was on, but you could hardly tell. Halfway to the embassy, Ed used what little Russian he had learned to figure out where they might buy some better clothes. The man behind the wheel was a Yakutsk. He might as well have been an Eskimo. He found Ed and Ricky quite amusing and continued to laugh at them all the way to the clothing store, then all the way to the U.S. Embassy. As he drove off, Clever Ed said, You know how I know it's expensive to drive here, Ricky? Because it's 20 below and you've got to keep a car running or it will freeze up and die very badly. Well, yeah, but I was going to say that fare was no cheaper than in the USA, and nothing in Russia is that expensive. It's crazy, all right. They turned and entered the embassy. In Yakutsk, the U.S. Embassy was only two floors. It was a little nondescript building with a gated entry and the stars and stripes flying. The building was rather sparsely decorated and sparsely populated. When they finally made it inside, they barely caught the attaché, an attorney for the FBI, on his way out the door. Ed identified him by the office that he exited from and stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. We've only got brief business. Errol, was it? Shto, said the man. He was startled and looked as local as any of the other Yakuts Ricky or Clever Ed had seen from the time they left the airport. He laughed jovially. Yes, I am Errol. I see you have picked up new coats. Here he indicated the furs on the hands, heads, and torsos of Ricky and Ed. That is a good idea. It is very cold, admitted Ricky. Our heat wave does not suit you. Ha. Okay, come this way. Glad you caught me. I thought your plane was delayed. I was heading home. Now I see you simply stopped for coats. Errol took off his own hat, put it under his arm, and began unbuttoning his coat as he led them to the little office he'd just left. The room was tiny, but it had warmth and character. Errol draped his coat around an old office chair that looked like it had been made 40 years ago and sat down heavily. He was not a skinny man, nor was he fat. The locals in this region were thick. Errol said, You chose a wild time to volunteer for the Russian cyber fraud seminar. Clever Ed removed his own hat and ran a hand through the red hair beneath. He still had his trademark Lenin-style glasses, though this pair was orange in rebellion against the cold he supposed he would meet. Ed had a pair in just about every color. He said, Yeah, well, they needed somebody. I can take the cold. Errol laughed harder. Oh, can you? I see. You are a regular polar bear. But that is not what I mean. I mean, with the war coming. Anyway, what were your names again? I don't have the dossiers handy. Edward Fogarty, this is Richard Patel. They all shook hands. Ed said, We go by Clever Ed and Ricky. Well, you cannot be that clever if you'll pardon me. I would give you 1 month, 3.5 at the outside, a few weeks on the inside. If you do not get out by then, you might get stuck. Is this the Donbass issue? Ricky spoke up. Errol nodded. Maybe he is the clever one, he said to Ed, then continued, That is exactly the issue. It is amazing. We have stayed out of Ukraine these 8 years. But with that, what is worth? Buffoon? With that buffoon you have in White House. Hey now, said Ed, you don't call Joe Biden a buffoon, even if we are in Yakutsk. That's an insult to buffoons. What did they ever do to you? The proper term is doddering marionette parasite. Errol absorbed the joke, digested it, then threw his head back, laughing. Ha 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 ha! Okay, fair. So maybe you are clever. Here's what we do. Let us get the paperwork done. I will give you a tour of the dormitory in the back, then an itinerary. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Classes would be Tuesday through Thursday every week. I have translated documentation, mostly in English. I understood you would help to interpret. Yeah, I understood it's an international group. We're rendezvousing in English to keep everybody on the same page. Errol nodded. And word to the wise, some there, some might not be. Well, expect a few men from the government. Dot your T's, cross your I's. And the conversation continued. Errol was very jovial and seemed quite happy to demonstrate his English. It developed that he was an American citizen by birth, but had quite a few family members in Yakutsk, where he actually grew up. With familiarity in Russian, several Yakutsk dialects, and English, It was almost destiny that he would serve in a legal diplomatic capacity for the United States out at the end of the world. Errol wore many hats. He worked with the FBI and any other initial agency that happened to interact with his U.S. Embassy in the Cleveland of Siberia. He was a translator, he helped train new personnel, and the list went on. He was quite happy to share any and everything he knew. And since Clever and Ed and Ricky, he was quite happy to share any and everything he knew. And since Clever Ed and Ricky had ulterior motives, they made excellent listeners. The pair had previously discussed the value of making fast friends of any contacts at the embassy. Eventually, they were shown their rooms in the residential quarters of the facility, and it wasn't until a whole week had gone by in a stuffy storage room converted to an education space at the back of the embassy that they were able to get away and actually plan their intended investigation. They were sitting in a dingy Chinese restaurant a few blocks from the embassy. It was strange. One would expect a variety of Buddhist decorations, but this particular eatery had crosses all over it. The Eastern Orthodox variety with that little diagonal line at the bottom. As they waited for their meals, Clever Ed stared at one and at length said, "You know what the best way to lie is, Ricky? You told me once. Well, you tell 99% of the truth and just slip in one little lie where nobody would even notice." Ed nodded. "Exactly. Now there are, like 1.3 billion Catholics in the world. You know how many would be 0.001%? Ricky squinted. 1,000th. About 1.3 million, sir. That's right, Ricky. A billion is 1,000 billions. So 0.001% of 1.3 billion, that's 1.3 million. But you know what, Ricky? There are only 420,000 Catholic priests in the world. Sure, there are nuns and bishops and what have you. And I'm dead sure there are plenty of clergy in Catholicism who are legitimate followers of Christ like the good book says. But most of them, Ricky, most of the higher-ups in the Roman Catholic infrastructure are like the people we deal with in government. Bastards, idiots, or both? Bingo. But there are no Catholics around here, are there? Well, Eastern Orthodoxy is kind of like Catholicism. Eastern Orthodoxy is kind of like Catholicism. Call them diet Catholics. No catechism, no Mary worship, no saint worship, plenty of chants, veneration of saints, iconography, architecture, and most notably, beards. Russian priests have beards for days. Ricky took a sip of tea from a small cup and replied, "Yes, they do have some epic beardage." But the Eastern Orthodox Church is mostly free of scandals. I can't think of any if you held a gun to my head. I'm not religious. But apparently they're more oriented on the authority of Scripture over the authority of mankind. That's a really big difference. Meanwhile, the Vatican had a hand in the Civil War, both world wars, look into the confirmation of Hitler, and even JFK's assassination. Jesuit stuff, mostly. But I thought JFK was Catholic. If his body count in the bedroom is any indication, he was definitely Catholic. I don't know how it works. I know he didn't kiss the Pope's ring. That was a big deal. He might not have been a bastard or an idiot. No wonder they shot him. Not the same with that brain fart in the White House these days. Woof, punctuated Ricky. He stirred his tea with his finger. So what does that have to do with the cybersecurity and figuring out where the Carl Marlboro man come from? Clever Ed played with his mustache and scratched stubble he was letting flirt with beard status. 2 ways. One, if we find this place, there might be something spooky about it, you know. It might be where a cult meets or something. I don't know. Maybe we might have to need a priest but there aren't any priests around here from a Catholic church, so I was just thinking about what our options might be. 2, Bob Treefighter's auntie gave us enough intel to identify 4, maybe 5 places that Russian couple could have come from. The Russians who bought her haunted house. Darn it. 2, Bob Treefighter's auntie gave us enough intel to identify 4, maybe 5 places that Russian couple could have come from. The Russians who bought her haunted house. Maya, and 3 villages around here that are surely near gone by now. And 1 that might not ever have been. Okay. Well, Each of them would have had an Orthodox church. That's a common thread we could build an excuse around, and we might need a priest anyway. Abruptly, the waitress showed up. She had a plate of noodles for Ricky and something with rice and meat for Clever Ed. Ricky took a bite immediately, made an appreciative noise, then said, "Okay, so how does that help us with cybersecurity?" "It doesn't. Not well. But. But? I'm thinking." Ed took a bite and chewed. Ricky said, what if the embassy got hacked?" Clever Ed chewed more, swallowing. "Expand on that." "A prank attack, and we can isolate it to one of the churches. But we don't know which one, just that it came from one, because of an email address hidden in the metadata. Maya Orthodox at easternpriests.com, but in Russian, like a localized network or community. Now we're getting somewhere. The prank hits. Errol uses it as an opportunity to employ some of our new techniques. You or me notices the email address in the metadata and finds a community web page local to an area just south of town. It's a victimless crime because when we go to investigate, they got their own infrastructure, and it's got nothing to do with that area. And then it turns out the website was made from a non-local IP. We can VPN it. The obvious conclusion? Some crank is trying to get a church in trouble, harassing American interests at the embassy because Russians these days know Americans are on the dark side of agnostic. Or the prank could just be to send Americans on a wild goose chase. Whatever the case, there's motive there, it's plausible, and we're in the FBI, so we know hate crimes, don't we? Okay, yeah, we're getting somewhere. Can you fake something like that? A website, an email address in the metadata, something like that? Ricky's forehead made wrinkles. "I think so. But it's too on the nose," said Ed, dismissing the whole scheme offhand. Ricky thought some more, then came up with this. "Errol said the political situation was getting spotty. Maybe a Russian with relatives in Donbass, Ukraine, who lives around Maya, maybe he sends a threatening message to the US Embassy in bad English that is extremely obvious because it's designed for the students and it was really one of us and they're supposed to figure it out." This made Ed grunt. "I guess in that case, we set up a home base somewhere? We get everybody following bum leads. Then while they're out getting confused, we investigate our own unit wherever they aren't. And hell, we can use one of the churches. I don't know. I'm curious to see one." Ricky chewed for a moment and nodded, then said, "I still can't believe she wasn't his actual aunt." "Yeah, I didn't know about auntie jokes with Indians. Sorry. Native Americans." "Oh, who cares?" And Ricky added more milk to his tea. Ed chuckled and dug into his entree. In the back of the restaurant were two pale men who kept their sunglasses on and hid themselves in a shaded booth out of sight from Ed and Ricky. They always seemed to be smirking about something. It was about the middle of February when Clever Ed and Ricky finally managed to pull their cyber prank and justify a trip out to Maya. This was easier than Clever Ed or Ricky suspected in two ways. One, the locals could drive right over the frozen river, and there were in fact ice routes that had quite a bit of traffic. Even so, it seemed the locals enjoyed traveling into the eastern wilderness, so taking a group of foreigners on a midwinter tour was desirable, even if it was 40 below outside. Two, everybody in the class jumped at the opportunity to put anything they'd learned to use. It was extremely dry stuff. But owing to the Russian hysteria since the Trump presidency, the FBI couldn't get enough intel related to Russia. So spending thousands of dollars to teach dry, likely useless information to any and all agents they could was a current prerogative of the agency. Indeed, tensions between the East and West had heated up extensively, and local media was constantly advising Americans to make arrangements for a safe exit. It wasn't until they failed to find anything at all pertaining to the intel Bob Tree Fighter's auntie provided that Ricky noticed they were being tailed. The villagers surrounding Maya were far enough from where Clever Ed and Ricky established a sort of home base, indeed using a central church, that the two had all day free of Errol and the others. They also had command of a vehicle thanks to Errol. He had given them access to one of his cars early into their stay, though not before extensively reviewing best practices for winter vehicular usage. You couldn't turn a car off in Yakutsk when it was winter. Turn a car off and you got a brick till spring. Apparently those following were not aware of this. Ricky and Clever Ed had been mostly in town, within walking distance of anything they wanted outside the embassy. Tailing them in Yakutsk was a more traditional matter of being proximal but not noticeable. However, when they took to the road with three other vehicles full of classmates, that required those tailing them to do the same. On the ride over, Ricky had noticed an old blue Soviet-era sedan following across the river and into the woods southeast of Yakutsk. On the drive back, he saw the same blue car to the side of the road, cold as a glacier. Errol was driving at the head of the motorized caravan. He noticed the vehicle in distress and pulled over, but there was no one there. Footprints were all around and a few cigarette butts. There were no people. After 5 minutes calling out and looking for anybody in distress, Errol shrugged, got back into the lead vehicle, and the trip resumed. Meanwhile, off in the woods on the other side of the road, Ricky had spied them, two gangly dark silhouettes retreating in the brush. Why would they be afraid in that bitter cold in the middle of nowhere in Russia? Weren't they on their home turf? It was very suspicious, but Ricky figured these individuals represented a tale. They'd pulled off the road to watch Ricky and Ed from a distance while not being visible themselves. To cut down on exhaust fumes that could catch the eye, they'd turned off the car. Obviously, it froze. They went to resume following and couldn't get the engine started, then had to beat it for the woods to regroup when the caravan started back. The most curious thing about it was they were almost certainly not Russian agents. As Errol had alluded to earlier, Russians would not have let the car die. Ricky relayed the information to Ed when they were back at the embassy, and it was a bittersweet revelation. Of course, running into something like that so far from home was a sign they were on the right track. It was also a sign their activities were known. If they weren't being tailed by Russian intelligence, it almost certainly meant Ake involvement. But the bitter part came in that they didn't get time to discuss the possibilities much further. Putin finally had enough of the Donbass conflict and flat out invaded Ukraine. It turns out Russia wasn't conducting military exercises at the border after all. They were preparing for an invasion. What a twist! The invasion ended the cyber fraud seminar weeks ahead of schedule, and everybody went to their respective countries. Ed and Ricky were last to make their exit, but Ed suddenly got a look in his eye. He told Ricky to hang back in their quarters. They were scheduled to depart in a matter of hours. Heading out, he caught Errol in the break room making tea. "Say, Errol, before we hit the trail here, I wanted to pick your brain on something." "You will have to pick carefully. I have a picky brain." Errol smiled his jovial Yakut smile, delighted at his punnery. Ed chuckled half-heartedly. "When we were at those villages and we visited that church." "What a dirty prank. But at least our new skills were put to good use, yes?" "Indeed. But what I want to ask, I saw this thing. It was a painting near the back door of the church we made a home base of. Remember? A painting of a cat. A black, long-haired cat sitting on the shoulder of an old, weird woman, ugly as hell. And I know it's odd, but it looked like she was opening a door into space or something. I've never seen anything like that in any church before." "Not her. The cat." "The cat what?" Errol finished his tea prep and took a careful sip. "The Baba Yaga cat. Opening the, what is word? Fissure in reality." Ed nodded. "Thiopa cat. It's that mystical Native American Indian cat that can open doors in the fabric of reality. It sounds similar with Baba Yaga cat. Only the cat does what the old woman wants, so she can walk her chicken house into the nether realm after she has completed her feast of babies. Does this... I cannot remember the word. Thiopa cat. Yes, does this Thiopa cat... Is she of the Native Americans with a female master? No, the cat's all on its own in the U.S. Anyway, creepy. Why do you think there was a picture like that around a church of all places?" Errol screwed up his face and looked at the ceiling. "I remember when I was small they said Sister Maya was destroyed because of one of those Baba Yaga houses. Made some Soviet couple crazy and they kill each other and their whole family, then disappear and the whole town burned down." "Really?" Clever Ed did his best to sound utterly surprised and astonished rather than exultant at a true lead. It would not do to appear giddy at the prospect of a town burning to the ground. "Yeah, it was the sister city of Maya. That is why it's called Sestra Maya. Not far from where we were the other day." You know where that house is that caused all the trouble? Of course, but it isn't sure. Cleverhead's eyebrows scrunched together. Why is that? Well, everybody avoided it. You saw the picture in the church. They're superstitious as hell. Of course, they need not be. We know what really happened. The Soviets took it out. Some prisoner escaped and the town hide him. Soviets retaliate, then make up a wild story in dozen variations and gossip around the regional pubs. But the Baba Yaga legend is much more mysterious. Nobody ever goes there. So roads get covered in snow. It is 10-kilometer drive from ruins of Sestra Maya in summer, though I seem to remember there may be shortcut through the woods. Either way, you'll have devil's time getting there in winter. Come back in July when war is over. I will take you on tour, eh? Ha! Crazy, you never know about all this stuff. Like the Matryoshka doll. Layers within layers within layers. You have to peel back the layers and you see what is hidden inside. Cleverhead caught that Errol was getting at something which had nothing to do with Matryoshka dolls, but he couldn't quite figure it out. He replied this way: So much folklore out here in the sticks. The sticks. The bonies. I don't know, the fringes of civilization. The sticks, Errol repeated. I like this. We are in the sticks. Ha! Yes, indeed, Cleverhead reciprocated. Internally, he wasn't as much jovial as he was driven and a bit concerned. Whatever happened next, he and Ricky had to determine a way to stay in Russia, or risk leaving and being separated by politics perpetually. Who knew how long this burgeoning war would stretch on? Who knew if they would ever get another chance? At the Bureau, the case was already cold. So cold he almost had to make a spectacle of himself arranging the excursion to Russia in the first place. And there were suspicious circumstances at play there, too. Also, the Russian Federation was not about to let a couple FBI guys from that Russophobic agency just hang about in the country, potentially stealing secrets. This was about to get complicated.